Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with global leader, writer, and change-maker Liz Matney. For over 2 decades, she has worked in human rights and advocacy, particularly in India, where her family eventually faced state-ordered harassment and detainment. What drives her passion isn't just that traumatic moment. It's the years of silence that preceded it and the healing journey that followed. Her story bridges multiple worlds, faith and justice, East and West, personal trauma, and systematic oppression. She is not interested in being a victim. She is interested in being a victor who can help listeners find permission to tell their own truths and hope that healing is possible even when wounds are deep. From her base in Colorado, we get into a story you need to hear. Enjoy this interview. Well, Liz, it's wonderful to meet you. Where are you located on the planet?
I'm calling from Colorado. Where are you
Excellent.
calling from?
I am in Kansas City, Missouri.
Okay, not too far.
Yeah. Once you travel through the purgatory of Kansas, you get the pearly gates of the
I've been
mountainous
there.
Colorado.
I've been there. Yes. Yes, I
Yeah,
know exactly what you're talking about, and it's a beautiful drive once you get there. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's just enduring all of the flat Kansas to get there. So it's kind
It,
of the karma you have to trade in to do it. So,
well,
um, yeah,
well, this is great. Thank you so much for having me here,
yeah.
and looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. Do you have any questions before we hop in?
Um, no, I'm just open. Is there a particular topic I should have asked before, but is there like some podcasts I've worked with, they focus specifically on faith, others focus on trauma, um others just focus on the things my family has gone through that I talk about in the book Home in Exile. Is there something particularly you want me to focus on?
The focal point of my show, since I have such a wide variety of guests on, is I really
Mhm.
get to the marrow of the guest and who they are and what makes you who you are. So it's just having a good conversation. I come from jazz radio, so I'll tend to riff in different directions based on our conversation. So it's
Okay.
really about having a good conversation, good overview of you, and leading everybody to what you're doing, getting your book, and all of that, the good business at the end.
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Well, Liz, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.
You bet. So, before we get into your life as a global leader, a change maker, a writer, I want to begin with this. 5 years ago, we were in the thick of this pandemic. Things were changing at a rapid pace around the world. How did you make it through that coronavirus era, and how has it influenced the way that you live your life and do things today?
You know, um, I was a mom of two young kids at that time. So, just like a lot of other moms at that time, I was just trying to keep things as normal as possible in the home. Um, our children, the school that they attend, um, the teachers were very consistent with online school. So, we had a very set time. Um, we had a set schedule that we were following, and yeah, as much as I could keep things consistent for myself, for the family, whether it was taking walks outside or making sure that the kids go to bed on time and we have our meals and enjoy our time together. Whatever time we have, we get creative when we can. Um, just keeping things interesting when everything could get boring. Um, I think that's what helped us get through. Um, Thankfully, everybody stayed healthy in our family, and that helped. The one big thing that was an eye opener for me personally was, a big part of my family and sense of home is rooted in India. And regardless of wherever in the world I lived growing up, I knew that I could go back to India. It was just a flight away. And after the pandemic, that changed. Um, when there was uncertainty about when I would get to see my loved ones, there were times when my children would say, "Mama, can you make something that feels like Papa and Mimo's home?" And so I would try to cook um, those dishes that I remembered from my childhood. Um, but at the same time, um, wondering when the next time it would be when the family could be together. Um, so, other than that realization, everything else um, stayed as healthy and as consistent as we possibly could keep it during that time.
So let's get into exactly what you do for a living on a daily basis here in 2025. And to do that, I'm going to put you in front of 12-year-old students. You're in a school, it's career day, and one of the kids in the back of the room is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?"
Okay. I do a few things. First of all, like I said, I'm a mom and a wife on a daily basis. And all the moms and wives, they know what that entails on a daily basis.
Mhm.
Um, that's a full-time job. Then I teach on a part-time basis. I teach intercultural communication. Um, at a university level online. And I've written a book called Home in Exile. It's a memoir of what I saw and experienced um, between 2022 and 2024 in India. Um, and other than that, my husband and I, we've helped build several companies. My husband has successfully sold several companies, which has been a blessing to our family. Right now, I'm working with him and another friend on building a company called OmniShip Express, which helps other companies save on their shipping costs. So that's what I do on a daily basis.
Wonderful. So let me ask you this. When you were 12 years old, what was your dream job? What did you want to grow up and become?
I really enjoyed art when I was 12 years old, and I loved working with children. And so I wanted to be an art therapist, working especially with leukemia patients um, when I was 12, 13 years old.
So, talk to me a little bit about how things turned out with the way that you live now and and what's impelled you. Take me back to your childhood. What were the foundational seeds that were planted, that were harvested, that have evolved into who you are today?
Faith was a big foundation in our family. I grew up between two cultures. Like I said, I was born in the United States. I was born in North Carolina in a small town called Elizabeth City. Um, and I grew up at a very young age going back and forth between two worlds across the globe. I studied, I spent some time studying in Europe. In India, I went to an international boarding school where there were about 500 kids in that school. It was set on the foothills of the Himalayas. It was a boarding school. It still is an international boarding school. But at that time when I was there were about 500 students between kindergarten and 12th grade, and there were 55 different nationalities represented. So very international at the time. And at home, my family was rooted in central India, and they were rooted in their faith. They were rooted in a lot of mission work. My Both sides of my grandparents helped open different hospitals and started schools. And my parents continued on that legacy in a different way. Um, and I remember in India where at my grandparents' house there were people from all walks of life who used to come and visit and have chai. In my memoir, I talk about imli trees, tamarind trees that were all over, the garden of my grandparents' house. And I talk about how I remember everybody from Mother Teresa to Osho, who's a well-known mystic from Central India, to so many people, artists, singers, actors, people from all walks of life visiting my grandparents' home. It was a very rich environment. It was a very open environment. And between being raised at an international boarding school and the memories of my grandparents' home and their legacy that's continued in our family, that's uh, that's played a huge role in building the foundation of who I am, of creating a sense of identity and belonging. I wanted my children to experience that side of India. And so after the pandemic in 2022, we went back to India, our family, my husband, my children, and I. We left our home in Colorado. And this wasn't because something I deeply wanted, but when my husband, the more he realized what a rich impact this heritage has had on me and my life, he wanted our children to experience it just as much, if not more, than I did. So we went back to India to be a part of family, to be a part of the meaningful work that was going on over there through family. And it didn't take long to realize that this wasn't the same India that I remember when I was young. India has changed significantly, especially in the last 2 decades. You know, I remember my grandfather, who was a pastor, sitting under the imli trees in his garden, having chai with another gentleman who had a tilak on his forehead, a red mark on his forehead, and the other gentleman would cite his Sanskrit Hindu texts and share his insights on those texts, while my grandfather would share from the Bible, and they both could have this wonderful, deep dialogue and exchange and share chai with each other and enjoy hospitality and call each other bhai. Bhai is the Hindi word for brother. And not just call each other that, but there was a deep sense of togetherness and belonging. When we went back to India in 2022, it was a rude awakening of how India has essentially turned into a fascist country that wears a mask of democracy. Now, religious minorities in India are targeted openly, vilified, and if you don't give in to the prevailing narrative of Hindu nationalism, um, you're considered an anti-national. And so when I went back in 2022, right when we got back, I got to see how my family, and especially my father, was being targeted. There were times when we had to be underground. And in August of 2024, August 6th of 2024, the police, the local police, the police of Damo, Madhya Pradesh, they illegally detained my family under house arrest. There were around 200 police officers around our house. And they didn't have a warrant, which they're not allowed to do. That's an, and it's a shame the way we had to leave that place, that land that my children once saw as next to heaven, or perhaps a reflection of heaven. Papa and Mimo's home has now become a place of this painful realization of dystopia. Home still is beautiful. Our memories will always be cherished and it will remain with us. But fascism has this way of stripping away the sense of identity and belonging, even from the most beautiful spaces. That was a harsh realization. And we had to come back to the United States under those circumstances, not knowing if our loved ones were safe. That's what I write about in this memoir, Home in Exile.
So I'm curious, going through these scenarios of both geography and a lot of emotion, who has been kind of your anchor, your hero, your inspirational force in your life?
Um, I said, faith has been played a big role in it. And I try to be a follower of Jesus. Um, I don't claim to be this uh, person of huge faith, but I'm grateful for grace. I'm grateful for my parents' example. I was always the skeptic in our family. I was always the one to question things, but it is my parents' example that kept me rooted in faith during very difficult times. And there were instances, and I write about several of them in the memoir, but I wasn't praying any grandiose prayers of faith. I wasn't saying, oh God, you can move mountains. My prayers looked more like, if you're the same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, if you're the same God who parted the Red Sea, I really need you to show up right now. And I, if you're a loving Heavenly Father who really desires a relationship with his daughter, then I really need to see you at work in this way. I need to know that I'm not the only one pursuing you, but you are pursuing me right now. Otherwise, I'm done with my faith. So I really need you to show up. And time again, God showed up. And I think that's the way I've experienced freedom in Christ, is that my faith allows me to be raw and real. And yeah, I don't have to fit a certain mold for God to continue to do his work. And I think that's one thing that's helped me stay rooted.
So let me ask you this. If you were to have a dream tonight and you had a book in your hands and you walked up and it was like a coffee table book and you handed it to an 18-year-old version of you and said, this is how your life turned out, would that young version of you believe it?
Yes, I would believe it at 18, um, because, and again, I talk about this in my memoir, but when there's a rising storm, there are signs of that rising storm. When a family builds a home in a place that's susceptible to tornadoes, they keep that in mind before building that house. um, and there were clear signs there, and I talk about this in my memoir. India is a country that's historically old but politically new. And in the politically new India, um, from the beginning of India's history as a politically new, emerging, independent India, there were signs of a rising storm. And I may not have imagined that those storms would rise to the extent that they have right now. I may not have imagined how people, how leaders across the globe seem to turn a blind eye, either be ignorant. I don't know if they're ignorant, but, um, you know, it was surprising when the vice president of the United States recently visited India. And surprisingly, there was no talk of religious persecution that continues to go on in the country, of the violence going on in Manipur in northeast India, of Muslims and Christians being detained in prison, being treated as guilty until proven innocent, without any rhyme or reason, being arrested. I know of one gentleman right now, Mr. Vijay Lambert, who's behind bars right now. He's the most innocent, kind, humble gentleman. But because he happens to be a Christian, he's been behind bars since October 12th. And there's no proof against him that he's done anything wrong. But the last two judges have said, oh, we don't want to pass judgment on this guy, so we'll pass it on to the next judge. And during this time, he's still behind bars. His son was supposed to be getting married on December 5th, and they had to postpone the date. And 3 months behind bars, what that can do to a person. I hope people show greater solidarity and sensitivity and compassion towards the people that are hurting across the globe. And that's been eye opening. You know, the one person who saw the rise of religious persecution in India and actually said something about it was Barack Obama when he was invited to India. He was the president of the United States at the time, and he was invited as a chief guest at a Republic Day celebration in India. And he made a statement, of course, that made the religious minorities in India feel seen. Like, okay, this matters. We are seen, people. But of course, the people, the leaders in India who are in power, they they are amazing at gaslighting, and they kind of had this attitude that, oh, we can handle our own country. We don't need an American president to tell us. And who is he to say this? And but he was the one who took a stand. And surprisingly, a lot of people a lot of leaders in the United States who have received support from the American church to be leaders in power have not said as much as they could say on behalf of what's going on against Christian leaders in places like India.
So, what can people do? I mean, this is clearly an issue. We are living in a world right now with a lot of things that are stacked against a lot of really good people that are the backbone of this country, which has been a blend of people from all over the world. What would you urge people to do to either be more aware or to be a part of being a solution?
Um, it's hard to say because I've been in the midst of that chaos. My family has suffered consequences. My parents, now they're senior citizens and they've had to reevaluate their sense of identity and belonging. Um, and like I said, the people who are in power in India, they're misusing their power and authority. That happens when people don't know how to differentiate between strength and power. But it's really hard to answer your question. Prayers are very powerful. I don't mean that as a cliche. I'm sitting here talking to you about this, and that's a miracle in my life. Um, so, and that's an answer to prayers. When my family was detained and my parents' house was vandalized by the Damo police who was doing all this without a warrant. You know, there were strangers. That news went viral, and there were strangers who knelt down on our behalf, on my family's behalf, and prayed and shed tears. People who felt like they couldn't do anything else, but they cried out to God, and I feel like that's a miracle, the way God has protected us and taken us out of that chaos. And I pray the same. I see that as a privilege, and that's the prayer I pray for the people right now, like Mr. Vijay Lambert, that God would release their tensions and ease their burdens and open those prison doors in a way that only He can. So prayers are powerful. I would say write to your congressmen, your senators. Um, you know, there's only so much that we can do, but people know people, and the more we speak up, bullies are afraid of being called out. And so somehow God will use all this to reveal His goodness, and that I keep praying that there would be more empathy in the hearts of those people causing this pain.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, Liz, let me ask you this. Of everything that you've accomplished and evolved to and become in your life, what are you ultimately the proudest of or the happiest about?
What am I proudest of
Yeah.
and happiest about?
Yeah.
Through therapy, I had the realization that this was the first time in my life in 2025, that this is the first time in my life that I have the assurance that my loved ones are safe, are fully safe. And thank God for the United States of America that allows me to be fully American and fully Indian. And my husband, he's Caucasian. My children are being raised in a very multicultural home, and they get to see how unique this blessing is in this world. And I'm very, very proud of that and grateful for that. for family, for community, for the mindset here in the United States. We've received nothing but love and support, and prayers and encouragement, from the community that we're blessed with over here. And I'm so grateful for that.
So at the end of the day, Liz, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, everyone that gets your book, everyone that knows you and your different roles that you play in life, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm an honest person um, who and loves God and loves people. Sometimes people are informed by the landscape that we grow up in, figuratively and literally. I feel like, I have been impacted by that, in a subconscious way, and in a conscious way in the way I interact with the rest of the world. So I don't I don't like to label myself as I'm this or I'm that. I wrote a book, and some people say, "Oh, now you're an author," but I just like to think that my superpower is honesty, and I hope I've expressed that honesty with grace, because I think radical honesty can sometimes be translated as being rude. But I hope that I've that this book, the way I've written it, it's honesty and presented in a way that it opens up dialogue, in a much less confrontational way than what we've seen in the past.
Wonderful. So if anyone wants to pick up a copy of Home in Exile, they want to reach out, they want to get involved, any of the other good business in your world, where's the best place to go?
It's available, um, everywhere where you would get your books, and Barnes and Noble, Amazon. Um, I have my author website where you can read more. Liz Matney, um, author website. I think you can. Could you post a link on this? Are
Yes,
we? Yeah.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
will put that in the show notes.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, read the book. Hopefully, it'll give you a different perspective, a deeper insight into our world. And, you know, I hope that whatever struggle that people are going through, and I know the Christmas season is not always easy for everyone. Um, we like to share our joys, but there are also struggles. And I just hope that this Christmas season, people are reminded of what Christ has said to us, that in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. I hope that through Home in Exile, that's an encouragement that every reader can receive.
Well, I've no doubt it will be. This has been a wonderful, courageous story. Liz, thank you for your time today and have a wonderful holiday season. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and allowing me to share.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.